This is Derek, and I am coming back at you with another one of my Napoleonic project updates. Okay, now as you know, um, I am writing my own set of rules called Marshals and Generals, and I'm taking rules from other game systems and I'm adding them to my rule, and I'm kind of making a hybrid rule system. Like I might use the shooting rules from one system, I might use the melee rules from another system, might use movement from one system, command and control from another system. That's what my original plan was going to be. I pretty much um, made a decision finally of how I'm going to do this. And it's going to make the rest of the rules fall into place very quickly. So I anticipate finishing my rules within the first quarter of 2024. And now, if you've been following my channel and following these rules updates, the Napoleonic project update, etc., you've seen me kind of put a hold on my Napoleonic project so that I could work pretty heavily on my Ancients project. The main reason why I've done that is because I wasn't really sure which way I wanted to go with the rules. I had a variety of different basing styles. I didn't know which way I wanted to go with the basing. I didn't know how I wanted to do melee or shooting or anything like that. So I basically put it on the shelf until I, had an epiphany, and my epiphany came to me through the Ancient project. The Ancient project. Okay, now as you know, I've been working pretty heavily on Mortem et Gloriam, right? Mortem et Gloriam is an excellent set of ancient rules. And I play tested these. I've been building armies for these. I even did a rules boot camp so that you could learn to play Mortem et Gloriam. And by doing that boot camp, it kind of ingrained some mechanics in my head, and I really, really like Meg. I think it's an excellent set of ancient rules. But I also see the potential in Meg to be more than just ancient period. Now, on their forums, or I should say on their website, they have a couple of other rules. What would you call them? Rules add-ons that convert Meg into these other genres, like the Revolutionary period. And when it basically turned a light bulb on in my head that it's possible to take these Meg rules and with a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of finagling, I can get them to work for my Napoleonics. So I've thought about it. I sat down and I kind of crunched some numbers only in my head, and I was like, this is going to work. I am going to be able to take the Meg rules, which are pretty much already complete, and then I only have to make a few changes here and there to make them compatible with marshals and generals. Now, one of my sticklers for miniature gaming, it's not a stickler, but it's kind of a druther, if you will, is fast, fun, and playable. I want my game, my Marshals and Generals, to play fast. I want it to, I want the figures to move across the table. I want them to be able to get into shooting range. I want casualties to happen. I want uh, I want melees to happen, and I don't want the players having to look up a ton of rules, slowing the game down, and I want it to go quickly. And by working with these Meg rules, Meg does just that for their ancient rules. They make the game mechanics, they flow really fast. You don't really have to look anything up in the book. Yeah, you got to keep your eyes on a table, but I think that is because I'm unfamiliar enough. But once I've played the game 5 or 6 times, those tables will probably become second nature. And that's exactly what I want for my game. The only thing from Meg, well, there's a few modifications that I'm going to be making, obviously, to make it a Napoleonics game. But there's one big modification is the command and control. I love having commanders, generals, right, that impact the game. And in Meg, they do. But in Meg, an army is pretty much preset on how big it can be, how many figures are in each unit, and how many generals you're allowed to have. But you have to understand that Meg was originally designed as a army list driven tournament style game, right? And that is not what Marshals and Generals is going to be. Marshals and Generals is going to be variable unit sizes based on scenarios, variable unit types and stuff like that will be based on actual battles. So that's a big change. And part of that change is the number of generals. And this is something I still have to work out. But in Meg, you have an overall commander. We'll call him a corps commander. And then you have 3 division generals. Period. That's all you can have in Meg. And I don't mind the overall corps commander and the 3 division generals, but if I was playing, just hypothetically, I would like to play a game like Quatre Bras. Maybe not Waterloo, that might be a little bit out of the scope of the game that I'm trying to design, but Quatre Bras fits perfectly into the size of the game that I want to play. There is a overall commander, which is a corps commander. Okay, now let's just talk about the French side. There's an overall commander. There are 3 infantry division commanders. There's a cavalry division commander. And then there are 2 additional cavalry. Well, actually, it would be 1 additional cavalry commander that from the guard that shows up. So technically, that's 5 division commanders, right? You have Foy and Bachelou and Jerome are the infantry commanders, and then you have Pyre as the cavalry commander, and then I think it's Lefevre, or no, maybe it's Kellerman comes in as the final commander. So I don't think there's a problem considering that there's 5 divisions, and they enter the board and they play and they issue orders to their own troops just like you normally would in a Meg game. It's just that instead of a limit of 3, well, that's based on the tournament army lists. It basically keeps the players honest, that kind of stuff. And it's point driven. Because it's a scenario driven game, I don't have a problem with having 5 commanders. That's what I'm thinking. A core. I want to play a game. I want it to be potentially scalable, where you could put two corps on the table. You know, you'd have two overall commanders, maybe two players are playing, and each one will have a number of generals. And most of the French corps in the Waterloo period had four generals. You know, they had the three infantry divisions and a cavalry division. Um, Now I could arrange the army list where the cavalry division commander um, is not in addition to the overall commander. We could say that the overall commander commands the cavalry and stuff like that, but I don't want to do that. I want each division commander to be represented. And I also know the capabilities of all the different uh, generals. So I can make them, I can automatically assign, competent, mediocre, uh, or legendary for each of the generals. And that falls in alignment with Meg. Okay, so let's talk about the units. In Meg, units are based on 15 millimeter now. That's what I'm working with. But you can play in other scales. But 15 millimeter, the units are based on 40 millimeter wide bases, right? There's 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters depth, which I rebased these 6 units specifically so that I could do a little play testing. But also, I'm going to show them off to you guys. I got 3 British units, the 30th, the 73rd, and the 33rd. And then over here, I've got the 1st Regiment and the 2nd Light Regiment, 1st and 2nd Battalion. Now, in Meg, you buy bases, right? So this base has a number of points associated with it. And in the army list, it lists that it could be hypothetically, it could be like 4 or 6 bases to form a unit. And in my game, I have 4 base sizes, right? We got Tiny, which has 2 bases. And they are actually based, they're going to be based a little bit different than these. They're going to be, I'm going to make them 40 by possibly actually I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I want to put just two figures on a base representing that they're always in skirmish, or 3 figures, because there are no 3-figure units in Napoleonics. There's not going to be any 3-figure bases at all. There's no loose formations. It's all close, everything. So I might do skirmish formations with 2 or 3 figures, but I also want to increase the depth. So I might do a 40 by 30, gives them a little bit deeper depth. And that represents a tiny a company deployed in skirmish. And a tiny unit would be 2 of those bases. So those units, and then there's going to be small, which is 4 bases, right? So then a small unit is going to have 4 bases. A regular unit or a normal unit will have your 6 bases, and then a large unit will have 8 bases, right? And that's the way I'm going to organize all of the scenarios are going to be 2, 4, 6, and 8. And that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty easy to figure out. And that kind of falls in line with black powder, actually. So that's fine. Plus, if I wanted to, I could play black powder with these units as well. There would be no need to make any changes. Okay, so uh, now one of the reasons why I went away from the 40 millimeter wide bases, because that's what I originally went with. I went with originally with 40 millimeter wide because I thought it looked the best on the table, right? It it that looks like a company deployed, not the square bases. You know, two figures behind each. You know, two across, two back. But I did that so that I could create these artificial self predetermined formations like march column, attack column, uh, line, square. But when and I you could do that with these figures, but there was a breakdown when it went from six bases to just four bases. Right, there was a huge disparity, and I'll show you what I mean. And we're getting away from I'm getting away from these predetermined formations, and I'll explain. We're going to do it the Meg style or a Meg way, and not a Napoleon's battles or black powder style, because those ways that way they say your figures have to be set up exactly like this, or your uh, bases have to be set up exactly like this. So I was thinking, okay, great. Um, I did not want a thin line like this uh, as a line on the table, right? Especially when there's six or eight bases. You know, you're going to have a full line like that. And I did not want that. That looks too thin. So I was going to artificially list in the rules that you always had to be at least two bases deep, right? So when you were in line, it would look a little bit like this. And that's okay. That's a good formation. I like the line looking like this. And then so I was like, okay, no problem. I'll just write this into the rules that you have to do two ranks. And then uh, and then I said, okay, so what about march column or attack column? I mean, attack column. You just put them like that, and you got two across, three deep, you know, or four deep if you've got eight bases. And then here's the problem: if there's only four bases, right, and you set up like that, are you either in a column or are you in a line? Because now uh, you can't tell. And so that's where my problem arose with the linear bases. So I decided to go with the square bases, or they're actually rectangles, but you get the idea. They're 20 by 30s. And that way I could take them and arrange them in a way that you could have an attack column and a march column and a line, and it automatically forced the players to stay in two ranks. I wouldn't have to write that into the rules. The that you could just put them all single file side by side, and it would come out looking exactly like that with a line. You would just have six bases. You'd have one, two, three, four, five, six bases of rectangles. Um, and I was like, okay, that's perfect. That works just great. But then when I got to coming up with my combat rules and my shooting rules, I was running into a hurdle that I had six bases on the front or four bases on the front. And what I wanted to do was throw a die per base in the front. That's what I wanted to do. And I still want to do that. And so that gave a unit six dice to roll. And I felt like that was too many dice. So I was coming up with these artificial rules in my head saying, okay, well, I could say you can only throw a die for every two side by side bases. And then what it would wind up doing is giving them like three dice right there. Or if it was a smaller unit, they'd have two dice. Um, and I basically struggled with that. And then when it came to combat, like melees and stuff, I was pretty much thinking I would do the exact same thing. And I was also thinking that when I take losses or casualties, I would take little casualty caps and mark the figures uh, with these casualties, and to prevent myself from pulling bases off, right? Because once you pull a base off, now you've got this odd number, and it just doesn't look right, right? Okay. Well, I've scrapped that entire concept. In Meg, which is what we're going to do, you attack by file. So with a unit set up like this, they're going to have three dice to shoot with. They're going to have three dice to melee with. Okay, so that's going to be great. Now, I didn't want to mandate this two rank file. I came up with an idea that instead of mandating a two depth rank, and one of the reasons why that is as units get attacked, they will lose bases, right? And now I can't mandate that this guy is two base depth, right? I mean, I could force the unit to reform like this to keep it at least two depth. But I didn't want to do that. I don't want there to be I don't want to force players to do formations. I want them to want to do a specific formation. So I've come up with this idea that if a player wants to deploy away from this, like maybe like that, I'm going to let him do it. I'm going to say, yes, you can do that. And you will get a die for every file, right? Now, the downside is not the downside, the upside, in my opinion, the two rank file is default, right? So there's no minuses and there's no pluses. This would be like your standard fighting formation, right? Two ranks. And all of these would have huge minuses. I should say a large minus. So it would behoove the player, using his own cognizance, his own strategy, to decide it's not smart to be in this formation. So he would prefer to be in this formation, not mandating it, but making it a wise choice. So players would fight like this, and not spread out so big. So basically what you're doing is you're getting extra dice, but these extra dice are very weak. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. Now, I know that in Meg, there's two parts of a melee, right? You have the initial impact phase or the charge phase when they make contact. There's the initial 1 to 2 minutes of fighting, and then it gets to the actual melee phase, which is the embroiled hand-to-hand combat that everybody goes to. Cavalry will be superior in the impact, right? They will run up, they will smash, but if they are stuck in a melee, usually that's only going to happen with other cavalry. if they're stuck in a melee, they just won't get the same kind of pluses. With infantry, they're going to get minuses because cavalry does not want to be in a melee with infantry. So a lot of times units will charge, get the impact, and then use an action or a movement to disengage. I know in some games it makes it mandatory and free so that when you charge, you just immediately bounce off. Where I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I'm going to let them stay in melee if they want to if they want to. And so, see, that's what I'm trying to do is give the players uh, authority over their figures. Okay, so now it's also known that the French would attack in in attack column specifically because of the amount of the benefits that it provides. So what I'm going to do is give a plus to ranks that have more than two ranks. So remember, 2 is 0, no plus or minus. 1 is going to be a huge minus, and 3 or more is going to be a slight plus. It's not going to be super huge, but it will be enough to make you think, do I want to be in a column or not? Now, March column, I've got that shown right there and right there. Basically, it's just one figure behind the other. Now, normally, units that are in March column don't engage, and if they do, they get owned. So there will be a rule that if you don't have a supporting file to one side or the other, you'll get a minus. So, uh, so if there's nobody there, offering security, if you will, then the March column would get a penalty. But being in a March column will give them a bonus to movement. So obviously you'll want to, if you're like way in the back or way out of the fight, go to March column and cruise across the battlefield. But when you get close, you're going to want to start deploying units so that you can, so you don't get that minus. It'll slow you down a little bit to fight in a column or a line, but that's your choice. Now, columns and lines will also have varying movement speeds because it's harder to keep troops in a line than it is a March column. Now, there's two ways I could go about this. In Meg, they have a card command rule where your generals get a number of cards based on their quality, and they play their cards on units. And I might have, and they're in colors based on how powerful the card is. I might make movement in March column free, like it doesn't cost any cards, and then maybe a movement in an attack column is a weak card. So so like all your cards, you can just play a card and it'll move, and then a line would require a stronger card to play. But if I do that, I think I'm going to give them all the same movement because now I don't want to double penalize them. I don't want to say stronger card and you move slower. I think I'm just going to do 3 base widths or 4 base widths, probably 3 or 4 base widths. I don't know. And then for everything, because a person only moves as fast as a person can move. It's just how well organized they are. And that's where the cards come in. The cards say, okay, he's extra organized or he's not organized. And by putting a unit in March column and not having to play a card on them means they're at least guaranteed to move no matter which cards you draw. So I think that's the way I'm going to do that. They might get a bonus on a road or something just because it'll help with organization and speed. They're not having to go over a bunch of ruts and through bushes and stuff like that. They would just be cruising along a smooth path. So far, so good, right? Okay. Uh, Now, shooting, right? Based on muskets and what I want the ground scale to be, how I want to enforce like battlefield scale. I was thinking because I was originally going with inches, right? So this is just a thought that I had. I'm going to go away from this rule, but this is where my thoughts were. I was going to go 6 inches or 4 inches for a musket and then 6 inches for a rifle, right? And we could still do inches, but I'm trying to get away from inches and I'm trying to go with, I'm trying to go, whoops, trying to go with base widths. A base width is 40 millimeters because that's how wide a base is. Now I can go with half base widths. That's no problem, but I'm trying to stick with base widths. Now this is 3 base widths. That's a good range. That's a good standard range for a musket, right? And so I was thinking that the a normal unit can fire 3 base widths. That's kind of what I was going with. Inches wise, 3 base widths winds up being about 4 3/4, right? Almost exactly 4 3/4, which that works out for me. I think that works great. Now 6 inches, right, is a little bit different. 6 inches is only about 4 base widths. Okay, so 6 being right here, right? Obviously, there's 6 and there's 4. Now that's 2.5 is 4. So I could go 2.5 to 6, or I could even go or 4, but I think I'm going to go 3 and 4. I, the 2 base widths I think is just a little too small. I think 2.5 works perfect, but I don't think I want to do half base widths when it comes to shooting. I think I'm going to do 3 for smoothbore muskets, and then 4 for rifled muskets. So like rifle units. Now I might give light units the 4 as well, even though they're muskets, just because of the amount of skirmishers that would be deployed in front of a light unit is greater than the amount of skirmishers deployed in front of a line unit. And that artificially gives them a plus in shooting because the range is, and I'm also probably give them a plus for shooting just because they're light, well trained. I don't know if I'm going to give the British like first fire or anything like that. That's something that I could consider. Give them a plus, but only on the first time they've ever fired in a melee. That's kind of, I don't know if I agree with that rule because I think any unit, any army, British or French, I think a first fire shouldn't be, we'll call it race specific. I don't think so. I think it should be or nation specific. I think that should be everybody. And if it's everybody, then I'm not going to give it to anybody because I'm trying to make it faster. So you don't. I want to get rid of that modifier and just assume that that would be included in whatever you roll the die. If you roll a really good number, then obviously they had dry powder. Um, okay, and shooting, right? I'm going to also give a minus if they're only one rank deep, right? But I'm not going to give them a plus if they're three or more. Also, formation changes. Since we're kind of talking about that, remember I said you can be in a straight line, you can be whatever. Um, I'm going to allow them to decide how wide they want to deploy and how deep they want to deploy. They don't have to be too wide like in Meg. Meg forces you to be too wide. Um, I could say that uh, fighting units are too wide unless you're in march column, and that's a single wide. You can't have a formation like this in Meg unless you're playing Pacto, which is a much smaller uh, force. Pacto only has units that big, two bases. Which, if you want to play a Pacto Napoleonics, I don't see a problem with that. And in that case, every range is a half base. Um, Basically brings the battlefield into a much smaller area. Okay, but there's no limit. So if a unit wants to deploy like this, that's fine. If they want to deploy kind of like this, there's a name for that. I don't remember what it is. Pod to charge, I think, where they have uh, a thicker outside and a thin inside. You can be like that. It's kind of not a big advantage when you only have six because now you're going with minuses in the and then plus zeros. I don't know if I would ever want to be deployed like that. Um, you could also be deployed like this, or even like this. You don't it doesn't have to be balanced is what I'm trying to say. It's up to the player to decide how he wants to arrange his figures. If he wants them like this, that's fine. Now, in a melee, let's say the British come in and they attack and they make contact right there in the center, right? Um, Normally in Meg, you fight by file, right? So this file is fighting this file. And then you also can fight with adjacent files. If there was another French unit, let's say there, and a different British unit was attacking there, I'm just throwing out hypotheticals. This guy can support either this one or this one. He can't support both. Now this one can only support this one, obviously. But whoever's performed the charge is the one that decides which of these he's going to do first, right? And okay, I'm gonna have to back up a little because I think in Meg, you move in the charge phase, you move and charge with one unit at a time. So if this guy's back here and he charges up there like this, obviously this guy's going to fight in the charge. And I don't think supports have any role in the charge. So that would be just wherever he attacks. And then the same with this one. Let's say he charges up here and he makes contact, these guys would not support during the charge. But after the charge, it'll go to another phase where there is a melee that takes place. And at that point, these guys can support whichever side, or this guy can support this. Now remember, this die is going to have a huge minus, but and so is this actually, because there's only one rank. So these would be very weak dice, but he'll get two, where this guy will only get one die, right? But it'll be a normal die. Where on this attack, I don't know what the modifiers are or which dice. This is all just conjecture right now. He would get a normal die. He would be a normal die, and he would be a superior die, right? So, the fight is actually between this file here. He's just throwing in an extra die. There's not a die comparison. It's just I roll some dice, you roll some dice, and whatever the dice tells us is what happens to the other side, right? So he'll have two chances to cause casualties, and he'll have one chance to cause casualties. Same over here. This guy would have two chances to cause casualties. He would have one chance. But their chance is so slim that I think I might make it automatically a black die, or maybe it's automatically a black die. I don't know. But at least it's a die, and at least it'll have some effect. Possibly. I don't know. I don't know how I want to do that. But it's up to the players. My point is the formation. It's up to the players to form whatever formation they feel is a logical formation, because these represent companies, and the company, like in this case, let's say it might be this company is just out of place, like it hasn't reached its destination yet, like he wants it to be there, but maybe it's falling behind or something. That's perfectly fine. I don't think I'm going to allow a formation like this. I think 4 deep is going to be the maximum, right? Unless you're in March Column. March Column allows you to violate the 2 wide, 4 deep requirement, right? It's kind of like you go into March Column, then you have your own special set of rules. But otherwise, you have to be at least 2 wide and no more than 4 deep. And that is the Meg rules. The Meg actually has a 2 wide, 4 deep restriction. It just doesn't allow this formation, which we're going to make a special rule for that. And then shooting, there is closing fire. So, like when that British unit attacked, both files would get to shoot at him as he charges in. It's a charge response basically, and you only have one base width of like what's called a zone of control. Anybody within that zone of control, when they charge, you don't get to shoot at them. But if they're outside that zone of control and they charge into that zone of control, you get to shoot at them. So, yeah, there's that. Well, I don't want to go over the entire Meg rules with you guys, but almost all of the Meg rules, almost all of them apply to Napoleonic, can be applied to Napoleonics. So now I pulled this chart out, mainly kind of just to show you, but As an example, we're not going to go over it right now, but as an example, you can see that, okay, I got upside down. You can see there are different types of maneuvers that you can perform, and based on your quality of training, you have different colors. And we can assume that drilled is the standard for like everybody that's fighting, but formed might be like militia, you know, they're, and then tribal, I don't know, maybe actual tribal units like American Indians or something. If I ever decide to do American War of Independence with these. But most likely you're not going to be using those. There's really only going to be two columns. Uh, there's no skirmishers. So units don't take like figures like a base and put it out front and say these guys are skirmishing. That's totally that's not a thing in my rules. You can assume that the battalion commander or even the brigade commander, if he's commanding multiple battalions, has given orders to his battalions to deploy skirmishers. And we just, as a player, looking down at the figures from on high, we're looking down from Mount Olympus, we don't see those skirmishers deployed in front. That's not our responsibility. We're the corps commander. We're not the battalion commander making those decisions. We're not even the brigade commander. We are a corps commander. So we're like 3 levels of command, 4 levels of command removed. Like you have battalions, you have brigades, you have divisions, and then you have the corps, right? That's where you're at. As a player, you are the corps commander. Patton said any level of commander needs to issue orders to his immediate inferior, his immediate subordinate, right? So a corps commander would issue orders to his divisions. And he does not issue orders to his brigades or his battalions. That's his division commander's job. But a corps commander needs to know where his brigades are at. So he says, command 1 level below, but know where your units are 2 levels below. A corps commander doesn't even need to know where the battalions are. That is, but we're going to put battalions on the table because players want to move figures. That was really just a heads up. I know this video took about 50 minutes or so, but I just wanted to give you a heads up of where I'm at, what I'm thinking with my marshals and generals rules. I've got 6 units out here that I rebased from the bases they were on to these 40 by 20s. Now, some of these guys, like my French, were all mounted on the 20 wide by 30 depth. They were already in the 4 by 4 groupings, and these British were already mounted on 40 millimeter wide bases, but they were only 15 millimeters depth. And I do believe the 15 millimeter depth does make the unit tighter. A good, like a 3 depth unit, it makes that unit 15 millimeters tighter, and it makes the ranks much closer. But there are some disadvantages to having a very tight base like that. One of the disadvantages are they were top heavy. So whenever I put a base on one of my hills or mountains, it would just tip over because 15 millimeter wide just isn't big enough for a wide enough, deep enough for a 15 millimeter figure. They would go on there and they would just go bonk. Um, and in addition to that, units like this, can't really see necessarily, but if I turn it sideways, you can see the bayonets, how they stick out, right? Like they're charging with their bayonet sticking out. Imagine the base that they're on being 5 millimeters thinner, right? Those bayonets would stick out even further. And if you were to rank them up, like I have here, they would be overlapping, right? The actual bayonets, would be overlapping, and it would make a unit a little bit unwieldy. And the front rank, even like these guys, the front rank of that unit would stick out so far that if you tried to engage another unit in melee, right, it wouldn't ever get to base. They would always be at bayonet length. But now I can actually get them base to base. And part of the reason, well, that doesn't really work because the commander has stuck him so far in the front. But you can see that I put the figures as far back as the base would allow, leaving a lot of free room in the front. And by putting the figures with bayonets as far back as they would go, the bayonet doesn't stick very far out the front. So these units can get base to base without too much difficulty. And so the 20 millimeter wide helps with melees. It also helps with formations, and it also helps with tipping over on hills. The 20 millimeter bases don't want to tip over. I can have them on a hill and they're not going to fall over. Now, if the hill is like a 45-degree angle, there is a chance it'll fall over. But a 15 millimeter, I guarantee that would have already fell over. When I talk about formations, what I'm specifically talking about primarily is square formation. Units that are two figures that start as two figures, two bases. I say figures, but I mean bases. These are automatically going to be on skirmish bases, and they cannot form square. There's just not enough men to form any kind of significant square. All right. So if a unit starts as a small unit, 4 bases, this can form square no problem. But if it takes a casualty, right, it can still form square. Because, okay, hold on. I was going to show you. That's a square, right? Simple enough. And then a six figure base is going to have 2 in the front, 1 on each side, and then 2 in the back. All right, so now if you were to measure this formation, that is 80 millimeters, right? 240s, so that's 80. And then over here, you've got a 40, a 20, and a 20. So that is still 80. So you have 80 by 80 by 80 by 80. That is also a square. But if this unit loses a guy, a base, then you're going to have to do that type of a square. You're going to have to take this guy and slide him down inside. Okay, so that's a different type of square, but it's still a square, even though it's really a rectangle. But now, if he loses another one, now he's 4 figures, he's going to be just like that, exactly like that. Okay, but if you started with 4 bases, and you take a casualty, now you don't have four figures to go around, right? You don't have four bases to go around. So at this point, you just put two of your bases back to back, and then you cap off one of the ends. That's simple. It could be this end or the other end. Um, or if you want your square to be like that, that's perfectly fine, right? So that's a three base square. And now remember, this unit started as four, right? And uh, if you were to lose half of your unit like that, the unit's eliminated. So there's no need to concern yourself with forming a square by putting them back to back like that. I know that in Mag, to eliminate a unit, you're supposed to take casualties one pip of damage over half. Exactly half doesn't destroy the unit. It has to be taken a pip over. So I might adjust my theory and say if you start with four and you lose it, this guy can just turn around and then there's your square. And then if he takes another pip of damage, the entire unit's eliminated. And if it's eight figures, eight bases, then you can form a square like that as well. So let's see, you got two in the front. I'm going to have to think about this. It might have to go like that. One, two, three, four, five, six, and then seven, eight. Okay, so that is a large square. That winds up being 40, 40, and the 20 depth. So 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters. So there's your square. Lose a figure. One end will be a cap on the end, and the other end will have to be one inside. Balance it out. And then if you lose two, then you're basically just like a six-figure battalion, and then you just form it just like a six-figure. Yeah, so we worked out squares. So I don't have any problem with squares now. I don't have any problem with the dice rolling by file for shooting and melee. The only thing I really need to work out is the modifiers, right? Unit quality characteristics, modifiers, and the general quality and characteristics. So what I'm planning on doing, just final heads up, I'm planning on taking Waterloo, getting enough not Waterloo, whew, that's too big, Quatre Bras, right? I'm trying to get all the figures based like this for Quatre Bras, and then get all the division generals for Quatre Bras. There are, I have already based up some brigade commanders, but I don't think these brigade commanders are going to be actually in the Meg game, in the marshals and generals game. I'm going to call this MAG, right? Marshals and generals instead of Meg, right? It's basically Meg Napoleonics. But it's MAG. It's marshals and generals. I didn't realize the initials were so similar. But there's probably not going to be any brigade commanders, just division commanders. It'll speed up the how many commanders are on the table, who gets cards, how you get deployed, etc. Now I might do brigade commanders to give us a marker on the battlefield that shows the center of your brigade, but he doesn't affect anything in the game. He's just a the axle of your wheel, which is you have so many inches, maybe a 6 base width spoke, a wheel coming out of your brigade commander, where all your battalions from your brigade must stay in that area. I think I might do that, but he doesn't actually give you cards. There's also because units are only getting like 3, 4, 5 cards. How are they going to move 8 battalions, right? Because there is something called a group move, and if your battalions are in a group, you can issue an order to that as a group. There's never a reason to only have 2 battalions in a group, because and that's really getting into the rules, but but it's because you would normally give them 1 card to move and give them 1 card to move, but as a group, you use 1 card to give everybody a move, but you also have to discard a card to make it a group command. So basically, you're still using the 2 cards. But if you had 3 units set up to move together, then it might be advantageous to make this a group command, where you go 1 card moves everybody and 1 card to make it a group command. So you would use 2 cards instead of 3 to get everybody moved. That's still going to be a thing. Okay. Yeah, so it's I just need to work out the details of what the modifiers are going to be. I want to rebase all my figures that I already have painted, but I can tell you right now, I still have about a division's worth of painting on each side, maybe more. So I still have Napoleonic figures I need to paint. But as I rebase them, I'll show them off again to let you see them rebased. Cavalry and artillery. I've kind of vacillated a little bit on cavalry and artillery. Artillery I currently have based on a 30 by 40, right? With the 30 being in the front. I think what I need to do is turn them. I don't know, maybe I can leave them 30 in the front, because I'm using 2 of them side by side to represent a battery, 1 of them to represent a half battery, and 3 of them to represent a oversized battery, like a full, 12-gun battery or something like that. Where in Meg, artillery is put on a 40 by 40. I think I'm going to rebase them 40 by 40. And then I still am going to go 1-gun, 2-gun, or 3-gun batteries. It's just going to give me more room to play with on the bases. Now, cavalry is going to be, currently I have them 2 figures on a 30 by 30 base, right? Because I was going to have them more in line with my 2-figure wide bases for infantry. But now that I'm going towards Meg, I think I'm going to put 3 figures wide on a 40 millimeter wide base. So the cavalry will be the same width as the infantry, and the depth will be 30 millimeters instead of 40. They're not going to be 40 by 40s. They're going to be 40 by 30s. And so that's going to fall in with Meg as well. The generals are supposed to be on 40 by 40s. So I'm going to make sure all my division generals are 40 by 40. And then I'm also going to make my division generals, I'm going to take some of those unused brigade commanders, and I'm going to fill up or make my division generals bases equivalent to their quality. So, like mediocre might have 2 figures on the base, competent might have 3, uh, superior or exceptional or whatever it's called, I don't remember, will have, or maybe it's exceptional, will have 4 figures, and then legendary generals will have 5 figures on the base. And that will actually equate to how many cards they draw. So it'll be a lot easier to calculate that. You won't have to look up any army list or anything like that. Yeah. Now you might notice that I don't know if I think you can in the screen. I took some of my British units and I mounted them with dark green flock, and I took some of my British units and I mounted them with like a lighter green. It's the same as this, like a lighter green. So you've got dark green and lighter green flock, and I did that to help me identify units. Like I can see that. I mean, I can see that this figure goes with this unit and not this one because of the flock color. But I should already know that anyway based on the I labeled them on the bottom, but I also, the British are organized by collars and cuffs. It becomes more important with the French because a lot of them are very similar. All right, guys, that's where we're going to end it. And thank you for coming out with that initial update. The get you guys all caught up on where I'm at with my Napoleonics. And over the next few weeks, I'll be rebasing my figures to get them ready for some serious playtesting. I already have these guys ready to go for some playtesting. But I think I won't really uh, need very many models to figure out exactly how I want to do, like flanks and rear attacks and front attacks and uh, guard versus light infantry versus line infantry versus militia. Are the Brunswickers trained differently than the Dutch Belgian line? That kind of stuff. Once I get all that figured out, I'll be sure to let you know. All right, thanks for coming out and checking out this update. And if you're interested in miniatures like this, you should definitely check out my eBay store where you can, like these all right here are Old Glory. You can find quite a bit of Old Glory for sale on my website, Napoleonic wise, and Ancients as well. And if you're interested in me painting an army for you, be sure to contact me first because prices might be changing on the first of the year, 2024, and well, they are changing, and you need to know what they are and know where you sit in my queue because I have some other commissions in the work right now. I've got some 28mm French that I still need to finish. Very close to finishing those. So hopefully I'll be able to finish those this week. All right, I will catch you in the next update.